Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. How are you guys doing? It's good to see all these familiar faces here. Thanks for coming out and joining us today. First, I love to invite you all to add your Instagram as part of your name. So on Zoom, in the top right-hand corner of your profile, you can see these three dots, and you can change your name and add your Instagram so we can connect later on and other places, and we just know who you are, can get to know you better. This is being recorded, and we are currently live on Facebook. I shared the link if you'd like to share it with your friends and family and post it to Facebook now so we get more people into the work with us. They can see what it's about. Please do. Also tomorrow we will upload tonight's session onto YouTube. So you can replay it and watch it later and share it with friends then too. And then after this experience, we are going to meet in Topia. You're welcome to come join us. It's an interactive space. So the link is there, and prepare to come join us. But now without further ado, I am going to introduce you to Dan Mackenzie. First off, as I jump into this introduction, the music that was playing during our opening, that's actually Dan. He's a musician as well as the host of tonight's event. He's an author, a podcast host, a personal counselor whose work is rooted in anthroplasticity, or I just mispronounced that word.
Anthroposophy, but good, that was a try.
For those who know,
the first time.
I should have been hooked on phonics as a child. Thanks for getting me through that. This is why we need team and community. His work is also rooted in nonviolent communication and decades of contemplating life and his existence and our existence. Dan is known in the Los Angeles area for stimulating vital conversations at social gatherings and clubs, where he also performs as an Emmy-nominated singer and songwriter. So welcome everyone, and Dan, take us away into Omega Male.
Thank you for that epic introduction, Christina. Thanks actually to the whole WeDeepen team. Teyler, who's running the chat, Kelley, who's gonna be handling the little assets, as we call them, David, for just being a cool guy. You guys are really wonderful. I'm super excited to be hosted on this platform. I honestly think you guys are making the world a better place. And I encourage everyone on this call to check out the other programs on WeDeepen. Now I'm just sort of clicking to gallery mode to see who's here. I know several people on this call, and there's a lot of people I don't know, so that's exciting. We got people from the East Coast, from the West Coast, everywhere in between, a pretty amazing age range. And most importantly, women and men, almost equally represented. So that's already a success. And the people I know on this call are all incredible individuals. So I know that I could just literally stop talking now and say, talk amongst yourselves, and something beautiful would happen. But as it so happens, we've prepared a little bit more than that. So let me talk about the form of what we're gonna do and then get into the content. Form-wise, I guess what makes this exciting for me, and it's kind of a social experiment in the sense that what we're doing here is essentially, what I'd like to do is approach men's work and men's concerns and men's issues. And that's something that normally happens in the context of men's groups that are exclusively for men. And I think the reason that usually takes place that way is because men tend to be more comfortable sharing in a certain way and being vulnerable and open in each other's company. And I think that's useful, but it occurred to me that maybe it would be interesting for men to get out of that comfort zone a little bit and to try to be equally open and vulnerable talking about men's stuff with women present. What would come from that? And I also thought it'd be interesting for women to kind of have a window, not only a window into what happens in these men's groups, but also to have a voice in them. I mean, after all, we are sharing the planet and our lives with each other. So, so that's what's going down. So in future sessions as today, it'll basically start off with me sharing my thoughts on whatever the given specific topic is for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. And today I might go on a little bit longer, so bear with me just because I really want to lay out the whole thing. And in future, I'll probably have co-hosts and cool guest speakers and stuff. But then after the initial share on the topic, we'll basically open up the conversation for the rest of the meeting, which has a hard out at 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And as you'll note, we're rolling with giving you guys the privilege of unmuting or muting yourselves. And we think this is a civilized group probably, but we do have some what we call rules of engagement that we'd like everyone to adhere to in our somewhat moderated dialogue. So if we can get that up on screen, Kelley, these are our rules of engagement. Pretty straightforward. Be cool, be kind, and be bold. To elaborate, in case that's not self-explanatory enough, be cool, just like try not to interrupt and try not to talk over people. Be mindful of how long you're prattling on for, unless you're me, of course, I get to blabber endlessly. And just be mindful if you're sharing a lot, maybe to, even if it's vital and inspired stuff, to just create a little space for somebody else who might not be as zealous. Be kind is kind of an extension of the first one, only, well, Christina likes to say that WeDeepen is not necessarily a community of like-minded people, but it is ideally a community of open-minded people. And so everyone is encouraged to share their views and opinions and thoughts as passionately as you feel moved to do. Even if you're challenging somebody else's ideas, that's totally cool. This isn't like a super safe space. However, we just ask that you don't veer into the land of personal insult and attack. That's not kind. We don't like that. Kindness is nice. And lastly, be bold. That just basically means if you are normally a little bit shy or not inclined to say something in a meeting like this, even though you feel kind of like you'd like to share, I just want to encourage you to get out of your comfort zone a little bit. I just want to assure you that you'll be warmly welcomed. And if you can't get a word in edgewise, just drop a little note into the chat. As I said, Teyler will be monitoring that. And we will make sure that you have an opportunity to speak. Look, I'm outside my comfort zone. My comfort zone is basically watching Netflix and eating ice cream. I'm not used to hosting these things, but it feels exciting to me. And like I said, I'm super grateful that you guys have all showed up for this. So that is basically the form. Before I launch into the content, I just want to sort of get a feel for the temperature of the virtual room here. So I'm just going to sort of call on maybe just one or two people for a super quick answer on like what drew you to the topic this evening, if you don't mind. How about somebody I don't know, like Marcus McIntyre? Marcus, how you doing? Nice to meet you. Just a quick sentence on what attracted you to this topic.
I was recommended here by Teyler, so I'm just kind of checking it out. But I mean, I know that I'm looking forward to the conversation. I've been plugging into the last couple weeks of WeDeepen conversations, and I end up getting like engaged in the chat and like wanting to say things and wanting to be a part of it. So it's inevitable to be drawn into it. So I'm looking forward to it.
That's great. I hope we can live up to the other experiences. I know that some of those other things have been really great. I've been checking out some other WeDeepen programs too. Well, let's see, who else do we have here? How about a quick word from David Shank? David, aside from me pressuring you to be here, what attracts you to this topic? I don't think I really pressured you. I think you volunteered. Oh, wait, you're muted, I think.
Sorry. Hey.
Oh,
no, I'm great. Thanks for inviting me to do this. This is pretty personal to me and my feelings for you, frankly. I've just, you and I are close. We work together, and I am fascinated by what you have to say always. And so I just, I want to see what this is all about. It's as simple as that.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks for that. That's encouraging and heartwarming. So I guess, let's launch into the content. I want to maybe kind of set the tone by taking a deep breath and presencing myself. We can all kind of get into our attention and attention. And I want to share a quote. If we can, Kelley, if you can put that up on the screen. I found this rather pertinent. There we go. I'll just read it. The old ideal of manhood has grown obsolete, and the new is still invisible to us. We grope after it in darkness, one clutching this phantom, another that. Yeah, so what's interesting about this to me is, we can drop it, it sounds very contemporary and even portentous, but the truth is, this was a Scottish philosopher, Thomas Carlyle, and he said that in 1831. So to me, it just kind of drives home the point that grappling with this topic, what manhood is, what masculinity is, what being a man is all about, all that man stuff, is not particularly novel, and it's not uncomplicated. But I do think that there are particular junctures in history where maybe it's more urgent to address it. And I would identify this time in history as one of those times. Why, you ask? Well, for me, it particularly came into focus, I guess, beginning with the Me Too movement. I know that that's not super fresh in the news cycle, but let's not forget, with all the craziness happening now, that was not too long ago that upwards of 200 prominent men were outed for having, sexually harassed, raped in some cases, and otherwise sexually assaulted women working underneath them, and sometimes, in some cases, men. Hello, Kevin Spacey. And that number alone is pretty shocking. But for me, what it reflects about the non-prominent men out there, the thousands of men who might be behaving in this way as well, likely, it gives you something to think about. I mean, the days of madmen are apparently not nearly over. But as to things that are in the news cycle now, it's hard for me not to connect in some way the police brutality problem that we're encountering. Clearly, there's a deep racism issue there that I don't want to wash over with this. But to me, the kind of intensified, hyper-aggressive policing that's been proliferating in the country in recent years, and even the way that the protests were met by this highly militarized police forces, for me, it's hard not to connect sort of a toxic masculinity element to that. And whether or not you like that term, I need only refer anyone who hasn't seen the first and perhaps last presidential debate a couple of weeks ago, if you want to know whether or not toxic masculinity is alive and well. I don't want to get too political here, but I guess I'm going to. To me, Donald Trump is the epitome. He's like the epitome of the toxic caricature almost of the toxic alpha male guy. I mean, he's probably mentally ill too, but the personality type is there, and the behaviors. I mean, aside from being accused of rape and sexual assault and worse by more than 20 women, including his ex-wife, by the way, charming. This guy brags about grabbing women by the genitals. We all know about that one. He openly mocks women in the most misogynistic way, the way he's gone after female reporters and his female opponents. Even his body language, you just see this classic, almost middle schooly alpha guy stuff. The way he loomed over Hillary Clinton in the debates, the way he shakes world leaders' hands, he just sort of grabs them and kind of clings to them for awkward periods of time and almost trying to throw people off balance. It's just so transparent and ugly. There's footage of him elbowing his way to the front of a bunch of world leaders to be at the front of the stage. So it's not just, bash Trump time. It's, to me, what does it say about our culture and our country, in our world increasingly, that a man like this could be supported by roughly at least half the country thinks this man with this character is worthy of the highest office in this country. It has to be a cultural issue on some level, that this behavior is not only excused, but accepted, celebrated by some people. And so to me, it's not a big surprise that there's this whole area of the internet that used to be very fringy that's now become increasingly and disturbingly mainstream. I'm talking about the Manosphere. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's basically populated by, groups that you've heard of, like Proud Boys and some neo-Nazis and alt-right guys, but it's particularly dominated by these sexist, misogynist, homophobic, anti-feminist men who talk all the time about being alphas, and their biggest insult is calling someone a beta or beta bucks. They have all these emasculating nicknames for liberals and other people that they want to disparage. Cuck is one, which is short for cuckold. Snowflake, they like to call people. Neckbeard, I haven't quite figured out why that's insulting, but these guys are kind of dark. And the most disturbing subset of them, to me, is a group of men who call themselves incels. For those of you not familiar with that term, it's a self-proclaimed term that's a shortening of involuntarily celibate. In other words, this is a bunch of guys who can't get a girlfriend, can't get laid, basically. They feel, just by virtue of having been born with a penis, that they are entitled to have a person with a vagina service them, and they can't seem to make it happen, and so they're angry and hateful towards women. And when I put it like that, it sounds like, oh yeah, this is just a bunch of pathetic guys on the internet. But what's scary and more deeply concerning is if you consider the fact that several of the recent mass killings were committed by men who identify as incels. So it's pretty deep and pretty dark. Let me just throw a couple of statistics at you to make the point even more starkly. Mass killings, speaking of which, have tripled in the last decade. Those are mostly exclusively committed by men. 85% of violent crimes are committed by men. 90% of burglaries and thefts are committed by men. Sexual assault is a huger problem than ever across the country on college campuses, where I believe the statistic is that 13% of sex is non-consensual in college campuses. So that basically means if you're in college and you're having sex, you've got a better than 1 in 10% chance, 1 in 10 chance that you are, you didn't invite it, you don't want it, and you didn't consent to it. Not good odds there, you know, hashtag a frat party, I guess. But there's more, you know, there's just the basic lingering problem of centuries that men and women are still not on equal footing. If you look at the professional sphere, women are not equally remunerated with their salaries. They don't have equal access to power and promotion. And so we have problems there. The classic glass ceiling has not really been broken yet. And I know that I'm painting quite a bleak picture here. I'm not trying to suggest that all men are these hopelessly violent, sexually predatorial douchebags. There's obviously a lot of great men, great guys. We're great guys right here, right? There's this present company included. But I do think that while none of us are perfect, we're all affected by these vestiges of historical cultural programming. And it's up to those of us who at least recognize that there's some deep-seated problems that a conversation is necessary to actually have that conversation. And to me, what that conversation entails and what I'd like it to become in this series is kind of collectively men and women wondering, what are men becoming unconsciously, culturally speaking, and what do we have, more positively speaking, the potential to become if we seize hold of our own personal and collective evolution. So that's what this entire series is going to be about. We're going to have specific topics in the future. I'm going to go into pornography, into male privilege, into fatherhood, into sexual dynamics in the workplace in future sessions. But this one's going to be a little bit more general. Really, my greatest inspiration for getting into this dialogue is a personal event that happened to me early last year. If we can throw the picture up, Kelley, the picture will speak 1,000 words. That is me and my son, Bear. This picture was taken just a few days before my 52nd birthday last year and a few days after his actual birthday. Let me tell you, folks, I can't think of many advantages to becoming a first-time parent when you're half a century old. We can drop the picture now. It's basically kicking my ass and killing me softly. And it's also the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to me. I'm sure my partner, Renee, would echo that statement. But if there is any advantage to it, I wouldn't say that it's how incredibly wise I've become. I mean, I'd like to think that I'm a little wiser than I would have been as a parent in my 20s or 30s or 40s. But it's that I think when you enter midlife, at least for me, you start maybe feeling like your days are numbered ultimately, and you start reflecting on, what am I going to leave behind? My life before having a son was more about what I want to get out of the world and out of life, and it's feeling like it's becoming more about what I want to give back or leave behind, especially as the father of a son in the world the way it is now. I have no illusions that somehow conversations like these are just going to magically change the world, but I think this kind of talk can plant the seeds for change. And I'll be damned if I don't try to be the best father I can be to this kid and the best role model as a man. And if we can't maybe just move the needle a tiny bit, then that'll be a mission accomplished, I think. So a funny thing happened to me 2 weeks after Bear was born. I ran into this old acquaintance of mine and hadn't seen him in over 10 years. And we chatted a bit, and then I looked him up on Facebook, and I saw that he was involved in a men's group in some leadership capacity. And he was giving, there was a video clip, he was giving this very impassioned speech. And the culmination of that speech, he was almost tearing up with this urgency, was, "Do not feminize your boys. We must not feminize our boys." I have to tell you, that didn't really land with me. It really rubbed me the wrong way, to the point that I decided I wanted to get into the dialogue of men's work. I mean, I thought to myself, is this what men's work has become? Is this the Manosphere, Trumpy version of men's work? I wasn't that surprised because this guy, God bless him, was always kind of an alpha male type, but I found that very disturbing. So the first thing I did, and literally I got so excited I wanted to write a book and do a podcast and do this. But one of the first things I did was I went online just to Google some definitions to kind of get my verbiage straight. So the first thing I Googled was alpha male, because this is something that always kind of bothered me as the accepted ideal for men. So here's some definitions I came up with. This is just Cambridge Dictionary, Oxford, Merriam-Webster, Macmillan. Alpha male, the most successful and powerful male in any group, a strong and successful man who likes to be in charge of others, the most dominant, powerful, or assertive man in a group. Dominant male, a man who tends to take control in social and professional situations. A socially aggressive, hyper-masculine man, a man or male animal that behaves in a confident or threatening way. A large and muscular, dominating, controlling, protecting, successful, and leading man. It's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, it's not all bad, right? But it is kind of still being presented in a way, if you think of this collectively with these definitions, as an ideal of sorts, right? Who doesn't want to be the most successful or powerful man? But what strikes me here is that this power and success is always in these definitions of the alpha male connected to controlling, threatening, aggressive behavior. It's almost like the alpha male has a compulsion to lead or control, not just the capacity. So the next thing I Googled, if we can throw up the picture, Kelley, are the terms masculine and feminine. Because if I wasn't gonna, feminize my boy, I figured I should know what I'm getting into here. So these are the qualities, the human qualities that are traditionally associated with masculine and feminine. You can see them: self-assertiveness, competitiveness, dominance, leadership, strength, endurance, stoicism, logic, initiative under the masculine, and then the feminine: compassion, cooperation, kindness, understanding, vulnerability, sensitivity, I think that's supposed to say, emotional self-expression, intuition, and creativity. Now, when I look at those lists, I don't know about you, but I have a hard time separating them as they are into masculine and feminine, and particularly into male and female. And more importantly, they all seem to be valuable traits for any human being to have, whether you're trying to inspire a young boy or a young girl, So I guess I figured if instilling compassion and teaching kindness and intuitiveness and that sort of thing in my boy is feminizing him, then I'm going to basically feminize the shit out of this kid. because to me, those are valuable qualities. And of course, I'm going to masculinize him too, I guess, by teaching him to have the capacity to lead and assert himself and have boundaries. So where am I going with this? I'm about to land the plane, so bear with me this last bit. I'm basically rejecting this hierarchical, vertical way of looking at men in particular, humans in general and men in particular. I don't buy this whole, that men, the notion, spoken or unspoken, that men are meant to be primarily masculine and whatever that means with this terminology, and women are meant to be primarily feminine. I reject the notion of human nature, that somehow humans have this immutable state, that no matter how long our history lasts, there's something unchangeable about us, particularly that we are beholden to such a strong degree to our biology, meaning that evolution, which is undeniable, is this merely biological progression where human beings are basically animals who are going to constantly be sorted out with the strong being favored over the weak. What I do believe in is that human beings, and I think there's plenty of evidence for this, culturally speaking, is that in addition to that biological evolution, that we have a concomitant and maybe even a separate and increasingly separate spiritual, or if you don't like that term, moral, ethical, inner evolution. And that more and more, now than ever, people are waking up to the fact that we have the capacity to seize control of our own evolution as individuals and collectively. And so what I'm inspired to do is, in my rejection of this dominance hierarchy, which it's been called, where the alpha is at the top, I want to flip this thing on its side, and where the alpha is no longer on top, he's now at the beginning of the timeline of humanity, where he belongs among the cavemen, right? I feel like that maybe was a good, probably an applicable ideal for men back when we were bonking each other on the head with clubs and dragging women around by their hair and, you know, fighting over scraps of mammoth. But we are evolving, and we are evolving in a direction that we can increasingly have an effect on. And I think that's what distinguishes us from animals. So that's what this conversation is about to me. What is the ultimate idealized version of humanity that we can evolve to? If the alpha is the beginning, what's the omega? What's the omega human? What's the omega male? And I'm not suggesting that there's one type, right? The alpha male is kind of this one type. There's plenty of evidence to show that we're becoming increasingly individuated and diversified. We're becoming racially intermingled. Our belief systems are becoming more nuanced. You can see how people's gender identifications are becoming more nuanced, and sexual preference identifications. So I'm not suggesting that there's some kind of cosmic, androgynous hero waiting for us in the future. But I want to stimulate some conversation around this rather than give a picture of it. Together, as men and women, let's talk about whether or not and to what degree and in what ways our own evolution is in our own hands, and what will that look like. And I guess that's about it. I guess I could say a ton more, but I think this is a good point to just open the floor to anyone who wants to jump in on anything that I've said, whether it's about the usefulness or non-usefulness of the terms masculinity and femininity, anything. I cede the floor to whoever wants to pop in. Unmute thyself and speak.
Where did you say those definitions were from?
The alpha male stuff just came from various, the most prominent dictionaries.
Oh, the masculine, feminine list came from dictionaries?
Masculine, feminine list, I was just basically, I did a deeper Google search. What traits are considered traditionally masculine? Or I also Googled the terms masculine and feminine. And so, yeah, that was a little bit of a deeper dive.
Got it.
Well, were you going to say anything? I'm sorry.
No, Umo, you go first.
Okay. So Dan, I love to talk about all this kind of stuff, and I have a million things that I could say. But I want to say, I love what you said about, this evolution of the male. And I really feel like I can also understand why, you know, your friend might be in this deep opposition to the the feminizing of men. And it seems to me that what I see happening is that people have a very either or positioning, and that's really the problem. And there is a shift that's happened, that a lot of what's been traditionally understood and accepted as masculine qualities, behavior, ways of moving through the world are no longer considered acceptable. And then we're having this backlash with the kind of extreme alpha being idolized by, like what you said with Trump, you know, he's a version of that. And people are attached to it and longing for it. And I do think that there is an aspect of feminism that has wanted to castrate some of the male energy and power. So I think that we need to have a really holistic view and understanding of the dynamics that are creating the situation in the world. And the answer is that you want to keep, like you said, both of those qualities, those sets of qualities, and that what to me the next version of the, you know, ideal version of a man or masculinity is someone who can hold and access both of those, and maybe still lead more with what is some of the traditional masculine qualities, because there are actual biological differences between men and women, and men are, as you know, biologically, I think, maybe I'm not correct with this, but I do think that biologically men may be more aggressive or even prone to violence. I don't know if that's true or not. And I don't think that if it is true, that's a bad thing. There is a time for violence. There is a time for aggression. There is a time when you need to protect your family or your loved ones or whatever. So I think it's just, I think it's a layered, complex conversation, and I'm excited to be having it.
Beautiful. Anyone feel like responding to that, or?
I'll jump in and say something. Is it Umo? Is that how it's pronounced?
Umwa.
Umwa.
It's like a kid. Umwa.
Umwa. What a beautiful name. When you were speaking, I was thinking of, well, two things came to mind. Is first off, I have seen over the years this challenge that men and women have with being friends. And, you know, it's kind of spin onto, there's a thing called the ladder theory, which says that men have two ladders, or women have two ladders and men have one ladder. Women have a ladder of like the friend ladder and the ladder of the men that they would date. And men only have this one ladder, and that male are seeking female friends, but usually they want to sleep with them too. Mm-hmm. So just of the thought of, and two, was a couple years ago, I did a big event for the love of men. And during that period, I had invited women to elect men in their lives who supported them, uplift them, and make them happy. And when I went out to speak with a lot of men, inviting them to nominate men, there was a few women who looked at me with like blank stares, like, I don't know anyone. I have no one. And one of the women was a dear friend who was living in New York City from Bulgaria. And it was just so absurd to hear that if a fire or anything happened, she got locked out of her apartment in the middle of the night or something, that like that just there was no man, even to fix something, there was no man friend to call. So I think that there's an interesting conversation to have around male and female friendship. And then in the differences of male and female from biology, I'm curious of diving deeper into that, and a difference of that you were sharing around men having more anger. And I think that equates to testosterone. Mm-hmm. I would imagine.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I'll jump in on that. So one of the questions that rises for me, looking at our evolution more long-term, is because I think there's no denying that we have biological differences, right? I mean, just even the way our sex organs function, right? Men have like a bajillion sperm that are constantly wanting to break out into the universe and fertilize everything. And women just have this one egg at a time that gets released and takes this really long time and is just waiting for the one sperm, the very best sperm, right? The fastest, most qualified sperm. And once that one sperm gets there, it's like a lockdown for months. So, and there's no denying, differences in our hormonal makeup, testosterone, all of that stuff. But my question is, are we just another animal? Is the biological aspect the only aspect that governs us? And to what degree does it govern us throughout our history? I mean, it seems to me when we were more animal-like, arguably, if that's the agreement of our historical past, that maybe we were more beholden to those impulses, and that as we evolve into the future, it's not a matter of suppressing those impulses, but more of mastering them. So I wonder, I mean, Umwa, it's interesting when you said there's a time for violence. I think I get where you're coming from, but there's also a part of me that says, when is that time? I know that the last time I got into a fist fight in my life, just due to being a man and being in a weird situation, and when I was, defending my woman's honor, I was 21 years old outside a bar in New York, and my friend and I got into a fist fight with about 5 guys. And it was ugly and brutal. And I felt like such a weird animal afterwards, even though I felt justified by it. I said to myself, I'm never going to do that again. I mean, except and if someone actually came at me, yes, and attacked me or my family, I would be prepared. But I wonder if we're not hoping to evolve to some version of a species that doesn't require violence. What does anyone else feel about that?
Well, I'll respond. So I definitely agree that yes, we are more than our biology, and I also think it's folly to pretend that it's not there and to ignore it. So I actually love what you said about mastering it. The word I would probably use would be integrating it. But I think that what you're talking about is the path, and in the conversation, sometimes it's just very intellectual, and it seems as if we are saying that we should do away with that part of ourselves and evolve and ascend to something better. And I don't necessarily think that's the answer. I think the answer is not to let it go, but like you said, to be able to master and direct it. And like, yes, usually in your everyday regular city life, there's not a need for violence. But if someone is threatening my child's safety, I will be violent. I will access that part of myself, and I don't have a problem with that, and I don't feel bad about it. And I would like to be, and I like the idea of like a man that is bigger and stronger than me, also having that same positioning in his mind to keep me safe or our child safe or those kinds of things. And yes, that's like an extreme outlier in a certain way of like how we're going to move through the world, but it's also not just necessarily violence. That's just the extreme form, but it's just of like being able to assert certain things. Like the world's not going to change overnight. So for example, like if I want to go and buy a car, if I bring a man with me, it's going to be much easier for me because they're going to respect him more. Just because he's a guy, they're going to be less likely to mess with him, if I want to, just different things like that. It's like, I feel like we should honor the value of those more assertive, more aggressive masculine traits. And yes, that's not the full spectrum. And that intrinsically and exclusively is not what it means to be a man. That's a very poor, shallow, lazy definition.
Hey, can I chime in? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I'm such a Zoom child. But what about the socialization aspect of it? I mean, when kids are born, they're like 2 days old and someone's like, yeah, little slugger, give it to them. I think, Dan, this is beautiful what you're bringing up. I love this conversation and thank you for doing this. But I think so much of it has to do with socialization. I mean, let's change this from when we were kids, everything was blue or pink and they were literally talked to in a certain way. come on, slugger, you're 2 days old. We know you can live a big life. And from the day you're born, you're treated differently if you're a boy than you're girls, and almost socialized to be aggressive and to be able to express anger if you're a man, or sadness and sympathy if you're a woman. And I think so much of it comes from that. I mean, Dan, I know you're going to be the most amazing dad, and your beautiful child is going to get this lovely experience that's not going to be how it was in the 50s and the 60s, with gender roles just like assigned immediately, without, you know, letting a child see, like nowadays people are. Let's see what the kid wants to do for themselves.
Yeah, you're speaking my language there. I actually saw that there was an experiment performed, I think in England, where they dressed up infants in clothing that sort of misled people about what their gender might be. In other words, they put a little boy in a slightly frilly thing, and they would have different nannies and people come into a room of toys and to, you know, see how they interacted with the child. And invariably, when they thought the child was a female, they would direct them to certain like homemakery dolls and toys. And if they thought it was a boy, they would, you know, give them the trucks and whatnot. So yeah, it's clearly a thing. But the way I would link what Gigi is saying to what Umwa was saying is, you know, what's the fix here? I totally understand what Umwa is saying. Like, why? Yeah, I mean, I've actually helped women that I was involved with and friends buy cars for that reason, or get their cars repaired. But to me, the fix is kind of in what Gigi is saying, namely, can we create a society where mechanics do respect women, you know, where you don't need a man to help you buy a car or to defend you in the street? I know I'm a little bit a kind of almost a kind of candide in my optimism here, but I have a belief in it. So, but I do understand Umwa, and part of I think what you're saying too, to support it, there's a difference between even sexual dynamics between men and women that kind of tap into anything that taps into our biological functions, maybe still a little bit more rooted in that sort of earlier, those Darwinian senses of, like, you know, women being turned on by this sort of protective element, or I don't know, I don't want to venture too far into that territory, but all this to say that the rules that we might aspire to socially might go out the window once we're in the bedroom. And yet there are also couples, and I know plenty of them, where the woman embodies a far more masculine, aggressive energy, and the men are very gentle and soft, and, you know.
Especially if it's acceptable, and it's becoming more and more acceptable. 20 years, 30 years ago, it wasn't okay, say, for a woman to be the aggressor. It would be considered a turnoff, or somebody might think, oh, that should be a turnoff, so maybe I shouldn't like that.
Can I say something? I've on the specific example of buying a car. I mean, I somewhat interpret that as potentially more of a like information experience gap versus like a gender gap, like because I would be willing to bet there's circumstances where guys are taken advantage of, where they're buying things for their wives or women, where because they just don't know, like whether it's, I don't know, you know, decorations or flowers or something, and they're like, oh yeah, buy these, they're the best, and you're like, all right, how much are they? I don't know, and then the woman's like, wait, you spent how much? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, I don't know, I didn't have, you know. So maybe it's, you know, with cars, maybe men just have, for whatever reason, more experience. So the ability to kind of like speak up and question things is, so it's less about, you know, the gender and more versus like so like to address the point of how to change it would be, you know, if women don't want to need men, or, you know, in that situation, they would have to become more informed on the topic, so they can call bullshit when the guy says you need this, and they say, well, no, I don't. Just like guys would have to become more informed on other topics. And I don't know, I could see that example going both ways. And separately, someone clarified the difference between assertive and aggressive for me recently, which is a helpful distinction. And could also play into this, where assertive is actually potentially a positive, helpful tool, and aggressive has a negative connotation. And I've known women who are way more aggressive and mean and violent than men, and scary violent. And then that's separate from physical, strength and capabilities, which I know there's a million women in the military who are out fighting wars and fully competent and capable to be strong and assertive. So I think I just kind of addressed a whole bunch of stuff in one, but I don't know if that sparks any further conversation, but that's my reflection on some of the things I've been hearing.
To me, it really goes back to socialization. If when I'm a little boy, I'm given trucks, like my brother used to sleep truck every night. And I'd be like, soft, fluffy animals. He learned how tires work when he was like 1 and 2 years old. If we have children that are given both gender assignments and toys and involved in these activities of both genders, I feel like when they grow up, a girl might be able to go to a car shop and be like, yeah, I know about that tire stuff. Yeah, I know about that engine. Hey, what is it?
I was actually thinking, like, I have a 3-year-old, and by the age of 1 or 2, given both options, would just start grabbing trucks and fire trucks, and we would go. So it's interesting to see, like, in real time, like, you go to a play place that has dolls and dresses and all these, and not to say always, sometimes they'll grab the princess or whatever, but just tends to somehow navigate towards that. So I'd be curious if there is something that's biological. I don't know. Like, I know your point, but I've seen my son at a very young age choose certain things over others without much like influence from outside. So I'm curious if there's something like pre-wired in us. I don't know.
Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
Okay, I want to say one thing to what you were saying about the car, because that's not what I was talking about. I know about cars. I took auto mechanics for like 3 years. I know everything about cars. That doesn't stop guys from trying to fuck me over when I go take my car to get serviced.
They fuck me over too, and I fall for it. I have to call like one of my dad or one of my friends who knows about cars. So it happens to me too. Yeah.
But I'm just saying, in general,
Yeah.
you can almost guarantee it's going to happen to you 97% of the time, so it's not about my knowledge. I research how much the car should cost before I go to the dealership. But if I come in there by myself, they're going to try and charge me $5,000-$10,000 more than if I come in there with the guy. And I know this from personal experience. And it's not because I don't know what I'm talking about. It's because as soon as they look at me and see I'm a woman, they, like you, in your example, assume that I don't know these things and I don't know what I'm talking about. And so therefore I'm easier to take advantage of. And even it's like my choice. Do I want to fight this uphill battle or just bring a guy with me?
Right. Today you need to buy a car, so you'd like to see a society where women are respected, but in the meantime, in the interim 50 or 50,000 years, you want to just get a deal.
Exactly.
I get that.
Yeah. I think this is going to take a long time for things to get fully resolved. And I think I'm going to need a guy for at least the next 50 years for those kind of things.
Yeah, we got to start somewhere. So Ian, it's interesting because two of the things you said seem to be making, I'm not saying you're contradicting yourself, but two of the things you say lend to perspectives, namely this observation of, hey, maybe boys do just gravitate towards trucks. I had a kid who was like that, Certainly a lot of parents will support that. But there are just as many people, when I think about my 2 godsons, who came from the same parents and grew up in the same household and who just were very different, gravitated towards very different things, and might be described in having different natures. You kind of, to me, the problem arises when just because maybe even the majority of boys or a certain number of boys or boys historically, had a certain gravitation towards a certain type of thing, have we somehow culturally entered into what we're now seeing on the internet, namely, a major problem, if not the problem nowadays, I would argue, is the intensification of the information silo, right? The echo chamber. People are becoming increasingly polarized in their views and in their deeply entrenched positions because they're constantly in a feedback loop. I wonder if that's been happening historically over time. And again, tracing back to a time when roles were just much more binarily defined in most societies between what men are like and what men do, and what women are like and what women do. But we find ourselves in a time now, like you said, Ian, where not only are some women, aggressive or scary or whatever you were saying, but they're occupying positions that men used to occupy. They're out there shooting guns in wars, and they are mechanics, and they are running companies whenever their, male privilege hasn't elbowed them out of the way in favor of some man. And so I wonder if, looking ahead, a shift needs to happen, a paradigm shift, because what about all those young girls who are interested in trucks? What about all those young boys who are interested in dolls or just, music or something that their dad doesn't want them to be interested in because he wants them to be a hockey player? I think you can argue that some boys definitely gravitate towards those little boy things, but not all of them do, and not even the vast majority. So in a time when are occupationally and socially and sexually are no longer that binarily defined, is there a reason that dudes know more about cars that has to do with sort of what Gigi's talking about, of the social programming that's arisen in a cultural echo chamber? It's a question, but it's also a suspicion of mine.
Yeah, so one thing, or go ahead.
You can go, Carl.
Oh, cool, yeah. So one thing that I'm present to around this is, I feel like as a society, we have been so focused on the masculine that the feminine has been left behind in general. And when I say masculine and feminine, I'm speaking to the energies you spoke of, Daniel, not men and women. In general, anything, you talked about women joining the army, you talked about women becoming business executives, and there's always this masculine nature, from what I'm starting to see even in some parts of the feminist movement, that let's all still do it in a very masculine way. So I think a bigger root of the problem is, as a society, we need to shine more light on some feminine qualities in men and women that make us more productive, make us more inclusive, make more impact. So where I'm going with this is the default bringing men and women into war? Is the default bringing men and women to be executives of a company which is imbalanced and it's just revenue driving and doesn't care about the impact at all? It's actually cutting jobs, it's actually ruining the environment, it's actually lacking heart. So what I think as a society is, energetically, we need more feminine integration in our men, and as part of some of the women's empowerment movements, I really want to see more empowering of the feminine energy and not trying to implant the masculine energy on everybody. Do we want to go to more wars, or do we want to actually get along? Do we want to have more men and women building businesses with all the money at the top, or do we want to have more people being able to put food on the table? So I really think that we are just so intellectual these days as a society that our men in general are not too connected with their feeling body. And now even I'm seeing some of the women's empowerment trying to disconnect from the feeling body. How can we get more people into feeling what our hearts say, what we feel is best, connection, impact? So I just think we need more of a feminine integration, men and women, just where society's going. We need to integrate leadership and penetration. By no means am I saying I think masculine power is very important. I think it's important to have leaders in this world. I think it's important to have powerful people in this world. What are those powerful people we're leading from their heart, the men and the women? So that's my take on that.
I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I think that that's kind of what I'm present to right now is I really reacted when I heard let's not let's not be aggressive, or, you know, men aren't going to be aggressive, or there's going to be no violence. Because for me, it's like emotional control. I'm a writer, and I'm working on a story around like what women can do in this dance, because, you know, it's around like emotional control. Men have to control their emotions, hide their emotions. And so I say that I want a man who's emotionally fluent, and then when he comes to me and expresses his emotions, I think he's a big pussy. You know what I mean? So it's that sort of, you know, I remember like, you know, I was married for, you know, reading a book about how to save my marriage without talking about it.
Mm.
I mean, that there's something like extra, like this is not dissimilar from the race relations that are happening right now, because both parties and both genders, you know, and I feel like now I said both genders, I don't know how many genders there are, but have to come to the table, be willing to be like, wrong, 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 vulnerable, wrong, vulnerable. And it's just like, because it's been such a long time in the making. I mean, going back to the trucks, but I guess what I'm here is wanting to know is like, as a woman, what can I do to facilitate a feminine expression in a really manly man, you know? That's what I'm looking for.
Between what you said and Carl, it made me realize, like, are we all inadvertently perpetuating this concept of, you know, male-female identification of those emotions? Like, if male-female energies and emotions are in both males and females, then why would we continue calling them male and female versus, like, you know, whatever it is, like, you know, analytical and assertive energy and emotional and sensitive energy versus, because by calling them masculine and feminine, you're continuing to perpetuate the idea that one is associated with men and one is, so if you're female, you have to be like more like a man to have masculine. If you're male, you have to be more like a woman to have female, versus what they really are, which is in every, like, is it almost continuing that, you know, association of those to the gender? Does that make sense?
I wanted to kind of spin off of what Carl was saying, because I think where the root problem is, if you still have that slide with that listed the masculine and the feminine, where we as a society are defining them as two separate things, when in reality, it's a mishmash of both. When you look at the list under masculine and you look at the list under feminine, you can recognize both of those traits in both men and women. So I think, you know, some of you have asked, well, where do we start? What can we do? I think the beginning point maybe could be as washing away those definitions and understanding and realizing that we're all both. You know, we're all a mixture of all the masculine qualities and the feminine qualities. And in some individuals, we get to foster more feminine, and in some individuals, we get to foster more masculine. I work with a lot of women who have had their masculine suppressed, and they're, you know, broken, right? They're shattered. And so they get to learn how to lift that stronger side that is more associated with the masculine. Yeah, maybe some men, like the alpha male that's really oppressive and pushy and arrogant and all of those negative connotations, gets to access more of the feminine. So I think it's really, you know, meshing the two together and understanding that we have both and we get to foster both and navigate, you know, as we are intelligently navigating our life, we're intelligently navigating our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts, and where we come from, you know, as we're looking at feminine and masculine traits.
I honestly think Michaela just hit the nail on the head. I feel like masculinity and femininity, like, are on a spectrum, you know, with one end being entirely masculine and one end being entirely feminine. And I think that as we've seen with like the way that our collective consciousness is growing and the way that like the LGBTQ community has been blowing up and becoming more accepted and more willing to tell people their sexuality or how they feel, I think that everyone, whether you're a boy or a girl, lands on a certain part of that spectrum. You know, we've all met, like, I have a ton of like girlfriends who are more masculine than some of my guy friends and vice versa. And that's what I think it is I think that it's on a spectrum, and maybe when we're born, as well as certain influences that happen in our early upbringings. You know, we were talking about the trucks and the toys and the things that are associated, the clothes that you begin to wear. But even in your teen years, like for a guy to make a girlfriend, you have your parents like, oh, do you like her? Is she cute? This and that. When like, maybe you're not even thinking about that stuff yet. Maybe you're just connecting with them as a human being. And so what I feel like is kind of the answer towards like people looking at femininity and masculinity as two separate things is to look at it, like Michaela was saying, like all together as one, on one spectrum that people are falling along all the different points of. And then to go a little bit off of what other people were saying, I feel like to really build, like if you're very feminine, or in the case one of you were saying, we're like, how do I get my male companion to be more feminine? I think that it's really a balance. It's really terms of balance. Like if you are very masculine, to look at what femininity kind of represents, and to become more aware of what femininity is, and to also try to connect more with that side of it, so that you're not sitting here on this masculine side, like we've been giving examples of the alpha male, just being like, oh, this is me and this is the right way and that way is the wrong way. And I don't resonate with any of that. So I'm going to attack that, and I'm going to, you know, condescend upon people that are on that part of the spectrum. I think that if everyone together was just more conscious of the fact that we are all blended into this masculinity and femininity, that's why we have traits of both, is we're all, you know, on some degree encompassing both, to find balance, you know, to realize what side of the spectrum you might be on, and then trying to make up and like meet in that middle and find that balance and come to an understanding of the attributes that you might consider yourself missing, and be like, why am I missing these attributes? Like, you know, and kind of going that route.
Amen, Marcus. Just to kind of summarize some of what seems to be said here, we're moving from a binary conception of people, men and women, towards the rainbow perspective, and not just sexual preference wise, but like what I'm hearing here is an acknowledgement that both men and women, and whatever else someone's gender identification or sexual preference might be, that we all have these elements, and that there's been a kind of binary artificial split historically that we're still feeling vestiges of. And it seems like most people here are in agreement to some degree. And it's just more a question of, do we continue, as Ian said, to call these things masculine and feminine? It seems to me that there's two ways to go here. We either embrace collectively and in our education and how we raise our kids that so-called masculine and feminine are naturally part of everyone. And so men don't have to have shame about being their feminine balance coming into play, and women don't have to have shame around it. Or we just abolish that kind of gender typing of the traits. And I don't have an answer to that, but I also want to bring back into the conversation that beautiful thing that Carl was saying about how even in the bigger picture here, not just individually, do we have a lack of balance, but in our institutions, right? In our culture. He seemed to be pointing towards an excess of the masculine. It made me think of this book that I've been reading. It's an amazing book about the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And most of it's over my head, no pun intended. One of the things that struck me early on, the left and right hemispheres are sometimes falsely identified as male and female, but they do have certain interesting traits that are kind of trackable in that way. And one thing that I've learned is that the left brain, which tends to sort of look for well-known patterns and fit things into what it knows, and sort of that logical thing that is ascribed to men. And the right brain is about looking for the outliers and the exceptions and a new technique and something. And what's particularly interesting is that the right brain wants to consider all possibilities, including what the left brain is saying. But the left brain does not consider at all what the right brain is saying. And so that kind of imbalance may be reflected in what Carl's talking about, that we have societal, structural, paradigmatic leanings toward the aggressive, penetrative dominance mindset of the so-called masculine. So there's kind of a lot to talk about there. Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet want to jump in? There's some very brilliant people here that I know sitting here that haven't said anything yet. So just want to open the space a little bit.
Dan, it's David. I think I'm one of the brilliant ones that you're referring to. So when you said brilliant, I knew that was my cue. No, I mean, one funny observation of all this is that I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to be more of a man and like learn how to stand up and do all those like cliched, man assertive things, because none of it came naturally to me. So I don't know how I got that way, but it's just so funny how I come personally to a lot of this from that funny perspective. But I think that I just want to say two other things real quickly. Dan, I think that you're dead right that we are at possibly a really special place right now where, of course, we're never going to escape evolution. I mean, that's, that would be folly to think that we can escape it or be beyond it in any, completely. But we are escaping a lot of the former physical bounds and pressures of evolution in just everything that we have at our disposal in society. And that's including all the challenges that we face. Just in this postmodern society, I think it's just fundamentally different from how humans, spent the first, several 100,000 years. And that gives us an amazing opportunity to form like new gender archetypes and new, just becoming new people and try to escape those pressures. And I think that you're right to start by identifying what those pressures were. But my last thought, just real quickly, is that I feel like there's a conundrum here, because if we're going to identify the alpha male, problem, which I think is obviously rearing its ugly head in a huge way right now in the form of Trump and all of those people, I totally agree with you about that. How do we stand up to those people, but while not fitting into their paradigm of being the, alpha male, stand up to type people? That's my question that I put out to you.
It's almost like you're saying, how is Biden supposed to debate this guy?
Yeah, right. Right. Great. Right. That's perfect.
Can I
Christina,
throw a thought in? This might be rather controversial in the scheme of the conversation going, but I had to think of, what if this is all a big mistake? Like, when I think of myself as feminine, I actually don't think of myself as having any masculine. This is just me. I think of myself as a full spectrum feminine being. And in my femininity, it includes logic. It includes a drive. It includes that I work hard and get a lot of shit done. It includes all those masculine qualities in my femininity. So when David, you say, like, how does, someone Biden debate Trump or somebody else, how do we bring those feminine qualities? I think of myself as, even in my work as a startup founder, I never leave my femininity. Or at least I feel that for me, I know that my strength as being a woman is going to power me through. And now, right now, we have, when you think of romantic love, and the right now singles are set to have outnumber couples. And what if all the flaws happened within our romantic relationships that stemmed out into the world, but because we haven't figured that aspect out, of communication and how to be with each other of someone who's different than us, what if that is essentially the problem and we keep trying to figure it out in these other ways? I'm just so curious. And then you add, you know, prescription drugs. If you even study birth control, which birth control gave women, you know, huge relief in the 70s. However, if you dive deeper into birth controls, it actually has thrown off attraction and how we attract to men and women attract to one another. So I just throwing that into the pot. I could go deeper into it, of my thoughts and theories on that, because I do have a theory that man's life purpose, and this is controversial again, is to make women happy, and women are to be wholeheartedly lovers of men. And I think if we lived in an environment where man's life purpose to love women, and I know that's controversial, love women, but women are to then return that, then I think the symbioticness of it all, and for sure but even a gay man is a masculine man. I don't know. I'm just, and also too, is when I did say that theory too, I have 2 gay uncles, and one of my gay uncles was like, what are you talking about? Man's life purpose is to make women happy. And I looked at him, I said, I see the way that you treat your mother. Like, you are so there for her, and you would be by her side for anything. I see the way you treat your sisters. So that's it.
It sounds like what I was saying is the fundamental issue is the concept of these words masculine and feminine. They're defined as masculine as traits typically associated with men. And we're saying that's not accurate. They're not only associated with men. And when you say feminine, the definition is traits typically associated with women. And we're saying, but that's not true. They're not. So maybe those words fundamentally are just not valuable and need to be removed.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. So, you know, I think it's safe to say that each and every one of us has been affected, you know, by masculine or feminine energy in a negative way, right? We've all been harmed in some aspect, by our mother, by our father. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, to really examine that and examine ourselves. You know, instead of saying, oh, how is he not being masculine enough, or how is she not being feminine enough? It's these labels, you know, like everyone's been saying, that we need to start to move away from, and really just look at the categories between each of these that we can integrate together in order to be better, you know, individuals. And that's what it comes down to.
Beautifully said. I want to, Christina, you know, when you shared your philosophy, I like it. I want to yes and you and say, rather than just men's mission is to make women happy, I would say human beings' mission maybe is to make each other happy.
Yeah.
So we don't have to get so binary with it. And we're sort of, believe it or not, almost homing in on sort of the final stretch here. So just to echo a few things that have been shared, that really struck me is quite beautiful. What Marcus and I think Michaela were saying really moved me about how, as Marcus was saying, we're kind of all on a spectrum, on various spectra, probably, not just a sexual one, not just a masculine and feminine, but we all have maybe leanings, you could say. And maybe you could say even imbalances. And so maybe our individual tasks are to come into balance, as Michaela was saying, depending on what those imbalances are. And it doesn't have to look a particular way. There's always going to be women like Christina who feel ultra feminine, and men who are sort of ultra masculine. But even those people can find, I think we have a task in a way to find balance, so that you have someone, whether you're like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who is this sort of like icon of masculine hulking alpha energy. But if you see this guy, I've seen little Instagram feeds from him, and he has a very well-developed sort of feminine balance. I mean, he's such a sweet father, the way he interacts with his kid. And then someone like Rufus Wainwright, who I think by his own self-description would say he's as gay as a day in May, and he's extremely sort of what people would call effeminate, but he's a powerhouse. And that man gets in front of, you know, massive crowds of people and controls the room with his massive talent. And so he has a masculine, or, you know, whatever that element is. So I don't think it's about, I think we're on a losing path to try to find some one size fits all for men and women. I think that's what part of the conclusion of this conversation seems to be going to. And I want to leave room if anyone has a last piping in to do. I'll just say thank you all so much for contributing and kind of.
Dan, I can pipe in.
Yeah, Walter.
Yeah, speaking as the ancient of days, the thing that I felt missing a bit from the conversation was a little exploration of what makes masculinity of a certain type toxic, because that's the thing, you know, what you feel, or many of us feel with Trump, is what's so toxic about him. And it's not the masculinity, although that's a particular masculine form of it. And of course, there's toxic femininity as well. So how do we differentiate between healthy polarities, where there really is a kind of vitality and energy that comes out of the polarity of masculinity and femininity, and which can, you know, come in all kinds of forms. So how do we recognize when it's toxic and when it's healthy? And that's not an easy road to go down, but I think we need to explore that to bring more light into this subject.
That might be worth a whole session, I think, Walter. Thanks for sharing.
Can I pipe one thing? I also want to say, look how far we've come. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and dads weren't supposed to show any emotion. They weren't even barely part of a family. They went to work and they came home. And now we've really come so far. I'm not saying where we want to be, but look how far we've come. Our grandparents were like, the dads were not part of any emotional part of the family for the basic, you know, last 50 years before we were born. And look at now, it's so beautiful that men are encouraged to show their emotion. I won't date a guy who can't cry. If he's like, I haven't cried in 10 years. I'm like, oh, that'll never work. But before, 20, 30 years ago, if a guy cried, the kids were told, hey, be a man, don't cry. And we really have come so far from where we started, though we have a very long way to go.
Yeah, and I'd like to pipe in on one thing as well. One thing that really stuck with me was, Marcus, when you brought up the spectrum. I think it's really important that we are all on this spectrum, this united spectrum. We can call it humanity, because really we do have all these different traits. We all do at different levels. And I think one fallacy we have in a lot of areas of life is over-identification, over-attachment to something. So what I'm saying is, I don't necessarily see it where one man may be on one end of the spectrum, another man may be on the other, but I see it as one man may be on one end of the spectrum today, and then tomorrow he may be on the other end of the spectrum. And Christina, to your point about are we overthinking this? Are we overcomplicating it? You know, there are situations where, from my experience, the more traditional dynamic has worked in relationships, creating polarity, creating sexual attraction. I've seen how taking on that more powerful role can create that. But then you also see with so many men that leads to what you spoke to, Walter, those toxic habits, because we're closing our hearts, we're closing our emotions, we're not having space. And essentially that's what men's groups are for, right? To allow that space. So are we able to own our humanity and in 1 hour be on one end of the spectrum because that's what serves the moment, and in another hour be on the complete other end of the spectrum because that's what serves the moment, or that's what's true in the moment? So I think a lot more non-identification to who we are and having to continually live up to that identification would be really helpful.
Carl, that's why I was saying, like, to look at, is there even a value in continuing to use the words masculine and feminine in this type of conversation? Because it inherently is divisive and forces identification. Like, what is the value of using those words? Like, are they effective?
The content we're talking about is wave, it's energy. The conversation we're having is particle, is intellect. So as humans, we always try and make sense of things, anything energetic. Like if we could all speak energy together right now, that would be fantastic. But we always try and make sense of things. And I think this is the best way we're doing it. I love the lingo because it helps me make sense of things. But I agree with you. Could we just feel it more? But, you know.
Yeah, we can use the lingo if we can divorce ourselves from all the associations and expectations from it, right? So it's either we learn to integrate the lingo without all of the attachments to what it used to mean, or we change the lingo, as Ian's saying. I don't know if there's an easy answer, but those are all beautiful thoughts. I hear that Teyler was talking about wanting to talk more about this issue of whether men are actually friends with women. I wish we had time to cover that. We might have to devote a whole section, I think, to friendships between men and women. Does anyone else, before I sign off and pass it over to Christina, want to add a final word? Some just really beautiful things have been shared here, and I feel like this has been a grand success with men and women equally sharing ideas quite openly. And so I hope you guys will join us for future sessions. And if you really liked it, spread the word a little bit. If you're not my friend on Facebook or Instagram, friend me. I think there's going to be a little community after this, but Christina, maybe you should take over at this point, because I think time is
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much. So good. And Dan and anyone else, if you're more of a Facebook person instead of Instagram, feel free to drop your Facebook way to connect you, the link into the chat box. Dan, this was amazing. Congratulations on a first Omega Male. Looking forward to your podcast and your book. Do you have anything coming up other than this program that you'd like to share?
Thanks for that. The podcast will air its first episode sometime in November. I can't say, but it will be called Omega Male. So if you're wondering and wandering about podcasts in November, look for it. And as I said, feel free to friend me on Facebook and hit me up on Instagram. And just thank you all for contributing so generously. And I hope we can sort of perpetuate and grow this a bit. It was a rich conversation for me, and so many little byways opened up that I'd like to pursue. And I think we are going to, there's a little hangout if anyone wants to join. Christina, think about that?
There's a little hangout, and just to remind everyone, WeDeepen, pre-COVID, we were in-person experiences in Los Angeles with a plan to roll out to 46 cities with in-person events. And now with this pivot, which I've realized it's beautiful that we can get people together from all over the world. We have people from Australia and New Zealand and Europe and India joining in for these conversations, America too, and Canada. So please continue joining. We are now a network of interactive experiences and entertainment for people who want healthy relationships. So definitely spread the word and continue to join us. A couple of upcoming experiences to share with you. Next week, next Wednesday, Hump Day has become a big day for us. Next Wednesday is the Great Love Debate by Brian Howie. And the Great Love Debate is an interactive tour. He's traveled with this show all over the world. 400 times he's produced it, live experiences of bringing men and women together to battle out and conversate on why is everyone still single. It's a bit of a comedy show. It's a great way to meet new people. So come join us. That's next Wednesday, 7 p.m., the Great Love Debate. Also, the Wednesday after that is Yes and, guided by Amari Anderson. And the topic, this is an experience that challenges us with, this was a little bit of it's courageous conversation. And so is Yes and. Each week or each month, it's a question that challenges the status quo. And this question next week or in 2 weeks is it wrong not to vote? So if you're interested, come and explore that with us.
Not to vote.
James Altertra is joining us on that discussion, and we're waiting to confirm the second guest for that dialogue. So join us for that. That is Wednesday, October 28th. Mind Sports is a special edition on November 1st. We're going to do a Trump versus Biden Mind Sports as a community collective. If you're interested in joining as a debater in that, please reach out to me. And then Nightcap Ninja happens every Sunday. It's at 9:30 Pacific Standard Time, or if you're a late owl on the East Coast, 12:30 a.m., join us, and Nadine will guide you into sleep collectively together. This experience tonight, Omega Male, will release on YouTube tomorrow. So we'll post the link on Facebook. So feel free to find it and send it and share it with friends. The next one will be on Wednesday, November 11th. We're going to be together 11/11 again. And that topic, we're still figuring out what that topic is. Maybe it's male and female friendship. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's something else. We'll get that released as soon as possible. And then the link for Topia, if you want to come into Topia, I'm going to go jump in for about 15 minutes and hang out. So the link is there. It's a cool interactive space that we can walk around, have one-on-one conversations, group discussions, and recap what happened here this evening. And lastly, I will add in, if you had a great experience and you want to see Deepen succeed and continue happening, especially if you had a promo code and joined us in for free tonight, is feel free to, if you have Venmo, you're welcome to drop a tip at WeDeepen. Feel free to send us so we can continue this work. And that's about it, all I have for you all. Thank you so much for a beautiful evening. Thank you, Dan Mackenzie, Omega, and we're out.
Thank you so much. See you in Topia if you show up there. Thank you, everybody.